So to give you a little bit of brief history of the wired clock systems in schools, hospitals, higher education, colleges, universities, they really became prominent in the 50s and later. Granted, there were clock systems earlier than that, but it really started to become the norm in the 50s and truly into the 60s. And really, they ran them all the way up into the early 2000s. So there's at least a 60-year spread of these wired clock systems in different institutions. They come in, different shapes and sizes and manufacturers. And we're going to get into that in a little bit, but they've been around for a long time. A lot of these facilities are still using them, and that's why we're here to help you how to upcycle them.
Yeah. So what might be different between a school and, let's say, a hospital or college? How could they use, or how would they be using them?
Certainly, that's a great question. Obviously, synchronized time is a factor in most of those places. When you get into the school market where you're talking kindergarten through 12th grade, and they're incorporating bell systems into there, a lot of the time those bell systems are on the same controller that's driving the clocks. Hence, when the 10 o'clock bell rings, the clocks actually show 10 o'clock. So it's very important to have them both on a uniform time base. When you get into the hospitals and the colleges, uniform time is important, but you also have to remember that what it would be like if you had to go and set 300 clocks after a 5-minute power outage or daylight savings time or issues like that. So it's very important when you get into a volume of clocks that not only they be synchronized, but they have a way of correcting after instances like that.
So Scott here is really our specialist in this department, but I want to let everybody know that if you have questions during the webinar, feel free to use that chat button. I as well will be asking Scott kind of questions as he takes us through this presentation. So feel free to do that, and we'll try to get to your questions in that chat pane as we can, or as time permits, kind of at the end here. So
great. So we'll continue on with the various types of wired systems still found today, actually. So all these systems have been around for, like I say, literally decades. Synchronous wired is probably the most common clock that is out there. Typically, a synchronous wired is a 3-wire clock. It has 2 wires for power and a 3rd wire on the clock to either reset it or correct it. Some clocks actually have a 4th wire where they have a ground wire. When we talk a 3-wire or a 2-wire clock, we're talking about how many wires it takes to really make the clock function. And on top of that, it may have a ground wire. But how many wires to make the clock function? So on top of that, we have impulse, dual motor, electronic carrier current. That was a system that IBM, Stromberg added. IBM is the predecessor of Simplex time recorder. Simplex carried it on for many years, and that was a system where they superimposed a frequency over your 120 building wiring. So there's really no dedicated wiring. They were actually superimposing a signal over the current 120 that you have. So that frequency came over, today it would come over the copy machines, the vending machines. I mean, anything that plugged into 120 volt outlets going to receive that frequency, but only the clocks had a special receiver built into them to receive that frequency and send them into correction. There was also some 120 volt, 24 volt options, 2-wire, 3-wire, AC, DC. So many different options out there.
Okay, so the next question. So the question is, what do you do with clocks that start failing in the field or whatever? Some of these legacy clocks. What are kind of your options there?
Certainly. So American Time was founded in 1980, and back in 1980, we obviously weren't making clocks right at the start. We were a distributor for many different clock companies. Some of them are around today, some of them are not. But we were a distributor for many different clock companies, and we allowed the customer to come to one source, to American Time, for all their clock needs. Whereas sometimes prior to American Time, the customer might have had to go to 3 or 4 different vendors if they had 3 or 4 different clock systems. So, for instance, one vendor's clocks would not work with another's. so they had to go to different places. So American Time allowed them to go to one source, no matter whose clocks they had. So we started out with the clock part of it, doing the parts. We were doing clock repairs. People would send in their clocks. We'd repair them. They'd get their same clocks back with new movements in them. So that's really, and we do a lot of that yet today. That's still a big part of our catalog, a big part of our website. Along came probably in around 2000 time frame, 2002, somewhere in there, Allsync Plus. Allsync Plus is really a replacement clock. Some people call it a solid state clock. It's truly a self-learning clock. It can recognize what system it's on. So it could be plugged into different mechanicals, not every mechanical, but probably the top 80% of mechanical systems. This would be a one-for-one replacement. So you could just plug it in and it would work in conjunction with the mechanical clocks that are already there. So again, it was a self-learning clock. It would learn what system it's on. So our catalog on the website contains parts, it contains motors and movements and complete replacement clocks for, the brands off to the right, Cincinnati, Duquesne, Edwards, and so on. So we have the parts. We can build mechanical clocks. There's a picture of a mechanical clock up above the pliers. When I say mechanical clock, we mean clocks with motors, gears, coils, brass components, steel components, and those are mechanical clocks to us. When we say Allsync Plus, then that is a solid state version of a clock.
So Allsync Plus can really replace any of these brands or specific models that are listed here, or?
That's a great question, Aaron. It is more specific models. I'm glad you brought that up, because if you pick any of them that are listed there, whether it be Cincinnati all the way to Standard, not a single one of them manufacturers made one clock. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, they all made more than one type of clock. I guess what I'm trying to say is if you have a Latham in one building and you go across the street and there's Latham in the other building, that does not mean those two clocks are compatible with each other. Every manufacturer made more than one model. So granted, we have an Allsync Plus that can run with all these manufacturers, but we don't have, I'm not saying it can run with every model they ever made, so we do have to verify that. But the Allsync Plus was designed to work with the most common systems out there. We're certainly here to help you with that.
And the impulse types of clocks are kind of a different animal, right?
That's very true. The impulse clocks actually work on a 24-volt DC, where the Allsync Plus work on AC current. The other thing about the impulse clock is you're not voltage to them all the time. That's what the name impulse is for. They actually get a pulse every 2 seconds. They click ahead to the next minute. There's no second hand on them, and then they stop. So then they're there at that position for 58 seconds. Then they get a 2-second pulse to bump them ahead to the next minute. A 2-second impulse. So the impulse, we do have impulse clocks. We just do not have them in the Allsync Plus.
I'm just going to launch a quick poll here. You'll see it pop up here. Which brands of clocks or types of clocks do you find in your facility? Simplex, Standard Electric, Latham, Faraday, or you might have multiple or ones that aren't listed here. But it's pretty typical for people to have some different systems, whether it's across a district, different schools, or maybe different wings of a hospital or college or something like that, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. You have to be careful with that, because sometimes under the same roof, we've seen where there's two different clock systems. For whatever reason, we don't know the story behind it, but we certainly have to help the customer deal with the situation.
So it looks like a lot of you, roughly half or so, have some Simplex clocks in your building or across your campus. So.
That's really true pretty much across the nation. Simplex and Standard Electric were the two big players back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, probably even into the 80s, to be honest with you. It kind of went territorial or regional across the country, depending on probably who the salesman was or who the company was, but Simplex and Standard, I would believe, would be the two biggies. So now we're getting into the parts of it, and these are what we would call mechanical movements. And as you can see, they all have different motors and gears and shapes and configurations. Now, the Up on top is a standard electric, and that's actually a dual motor clock. Underneath, to the right of it, you see a motor on the standard electric. Underneath on the box side, you can't see it, but there's actually a second motor there. So there's a drive motor and a speed up or a reset motor, I guess we would call it. Number two is a National. Duquesne also used that same one at one time. I believe Rolland also used that same mechanical movement. So you could have National made them, but they private labeled for other companies, so you could actually have a different name on the clock, but it looks the same. Three is Honeywell Faraday. Honeywell Faraday is a whole different protocol than the others. And finally, at the bottom, you have Simplex IBM on the left, Cincinnati and Edwards on the right. We lump them two together because really the timing protocol from the master is the same. Those two are interchangeable with each other. They're not interchangeable with anything above them. So at the minimum, you have Standard Electric, National, Honeywell Faraday, and then number four, you have actually four different timing protocols there. And none of them, besides the Cincinnati, Edwards, and Simplex, are compatible with each other. There's no harm done if you put one clock on a different system. No damage will be done, but obviously they're not going to work correctly.
So these are still available. Say you can replace this whole movement, or if the motor goes out, you can just replace the motor as well?
Yeah, certainly. It depends on your capabilities and how comfortable you feel with it, but you can buy the parts from us to repair your clock, as these pictures show. If you just want to buy the Synchron motor and put it on the movement, or you can buy the motor movement complete and put it in your clock. So all these mechanical movements are still made today. Again, you can buy the parts, you can buy the complete movements. You could send your clock in to repair, and we can repair it and give you your same clock back with these new parts. Or you can buy a brand new clock with these parts already built into it. So there's many different options as far as mechanical go.
And the solid state movement would replace really any of these, right?
That's when you heard the term self-learning earlier, that's really the beauty of the L-Sync Plus clock, is that one movement, one clock, one brand will work on all of these systems. So you could take the L-Sync Plus clock and you could plug it into the standard electric system, and it'll learn that system. The next day you could plug it into the Honeywell and Faraday, and it'll learn that system. Now it's going to take overnight for it to go through and work the protocol, but it will run on those systems. So now you have one clock that you can actually start to work on multiple different protocols.
There's really a level of simplicity there, or universality.
Yeah, well, it makes it too. So you only, if you fight to find the right combination, you only have to buy one clock that'll work in two buildings instead of having to buy two clocks. Or if you have 5 buildings, you potentially could have to buy 5 different clocks to work in them.
Now we'll talk a little bit about replacing these movements. If you were to, I guess, replace the traditional mechanical movement, or if you were to replace one of those with one of the L-Sync movements.
Yeah, correct. So what we did here is we just took a picture of this is actually a Simplex clock, and I believe it's a fairly current one. It looks like it's a black plastic case. And this is what I would call just a regular mechanical clock. Now, if we look at the back side, there's some important information on here. There's actually a round cover. We call that a dust cover. It just keeps the dirt out of the mechanism. But on that dust cover, there's really some pertinent information as far as a model number. And down below, it says clutch and motor. And actually, if you look to the right, one of them over near the buzzer, there's a little red or a little black X in the box here. And that really defines the voltage of this clock. I believe this one is 24 volt. It's kind of hard for me to see, but there's also a number up above that 6310-92, and I can't read it, 29 maybe. But if we were to zoom in on that, we could really identify what this clock is. Another option is, I think this next picture will show the cover taken off the back of it.
Is there any difference with the L-Sync movement based on if it's a 120 or 24?
With the L-Sync movement, there is, even with mechanical, there is. So you do need to identify them up front, yes. I believe as we look at this clock now with that cover off, I can verify. I see a yellow wire coming out of that round synchron motor, the silver motor right in the middle of it. If I see a yellow wire coming off that motor, that tells me it's 24 volt right there. So I know this clock is 24 volt. The label verified that too, but it's really nice to look underneath the clock because those covers are kind of universal. And I've seen people take those covers and put them on a different clock, and it can mislead a person in that model number, and they could be ordering the wrong clock at that point. So this here is a mechanical clock. This is truly probably the way it came from the factory. It was built this way with this movement in there, and it left the factory looking like that. Now this shows pretty much the same clock, same style clock, putting our solid state pulsing plus movement into it. So our solid state movement is a little black box right there in the middle, and underneath it we have our own dust cover. That dust cover has a little processor board. You can't really see it at this point. I think we might show it later on, but there is a little processor board in it, and you see a connector off to the left, and I think there's a red, green, yellow wire on there. That's the smarts going from that processor board up to the movement to tell it what time to go to. There's also a Molex connector, what we would call a Molex connector, coming off to the right of the silver box that gets plugged into it. And that's really what plugs into your building wiring. If it doesn't match, you can certainly hardwire it, but then there's a connector on the dust cover. Otherwise, there is a connector that might integrate with your building wire already too. So as you can see, this is with the cover on Symbox clock. And if you look at it, we use those three same mounting patterns. You see the two to the left, one to the left, one to the right of the circle where the plastic cover used to be. So we have a kit we made up that holds our processor board into this box, but it mounts right to the Symbox box. Actually, there's various kits for the various manufacturers. Symbox has their own. I believe National has their own, and Standard Electric might have their own too. So depending on the model of clock you have, depends on what kit you get. The components are pretty much universal. There might be some mounting nuts that are different. It's really how the back cover attaches to their clock that makes the kits different.
Okay. So this is kind of the finished one, right? After the
Yeah, this is it. I mean, as you can see from that picture that we had before, there really isn't much difference from the front of the clock. Here's a great picture of them. These are actually two different clocks, but one has a mechanical movement, one has the solid state movement in it. And if you want to keep everything looking the same, that's one of the beauty about repairing your own clocks or sending it into us to have it repaired. If you send it into us, we will ask you, what do you want? Do you want the mechanical movement or do you want the solid state movement? We can do whatever direction you have. But as you can see, as far as aesthetics go, clocks look the same. Nobody's going to know that they're different. This is the kit that we have that I was kind of referring to a little bit ago. Some of the mounting hardware to the left might be a little bit different from one manufacturer to the other. The dust cover, the silver can that holds the processor board, you can see the 3 points on here now clearly that hold that to the back of the Symbox clock. So those holes are already lined up with what you currently have on your clock. The processor board is pretty much the same on all our Allsync kits for the most part. There is one that's a little bit different. I'm not going to get into that detail right now, but for the most part, they're all the same. And that's the processor board that distinguishes really what protocol are you on. So when you energize that red line from your system for a certain length of time, we're going to look at it and say, oh, we're on a standard, we're on a national, we're on a Symbox, whatever system you might be on.
Okay, so really when you compare like buying a kit like this and the time involved versus if you were to just buy a clock assembled an Allsync Plus clock, what are we talking about as far as comparison in price? I mean, how far along the way are you if you purchase a kit versus buying a new clock, and kind of what are some considerations?
Yeah, I guess I don't have the actual price in front of me. I think in the kit price is probably around $75 a clock. I think we have a 5-piece minimum on there too, just to be aware of that when you buy a kit. There's a small amount of kits that you have to buy. As far as the clock goes, I'm sure the clock is around $130.
I suppose it's dependent upon what size of clock and if you have a different bezel or
Exactly,
something like that.
plastic or metal, bezel or case, round or square, there's all those considerations, that's true. So the kit price is pretty much fixed, but the new clock price can change.
And if you're really looking at keeping that specific particular clock, then a kit might be the way to go.
The kit or sending it into us for repair would be the way to go, because that way you get your same clock back either way. You don't have to worry about, everything in the building will match it, if that's a concern to you.
But if you're adding two, then it's probably, you're buying a new clock. Probably.
Yeah, buying a new clock. The other thing to consider too is the fact that some of these manufacturers have double-faced clocks. So that's a clock sticking out from a hallway, either hanging out from the wall or from the ceiling. It's a bracket that has two clocks on both sides. We would call it double dial. Other people call it double face. There's a clock on both sides. Our new clocks don't fit everybody's bracket, so there is a consideration there. The option is to get that clock repaired if you had half a side go bad. Another option might be to grab a clock, if possible, from a classroom, if it's the same manufacturer, put on that bracket, and then replace the clock in the classroom. So those are just options for you to get around that.
Okay.
All right, we'll get into the benefits here of the All-Sync Plus clocks. There is an energy savings. On the 24-volt side, it's really huge, up to 80%. On the 110-volt side, it's not as much, but there's still energy savings to be had. Those old mechanical motors and clutches and coils and magnets, they really eat up some current. So. There is a diagnostic indicator on our All-Sync Plus clock. It is a little LED that lights up on the back of the clock, and you can see it really with just turning around the back of the clock. You do not have to take the cover off the back. You just take it off the wall, turn it around, and you will see that LED. There's also a little menu, so to speak, of what that LED does. So if it's in a certain mode, whether it be blinking or solid or red or green, it's going to tell you what state it is.
And you're really not going to get anything like that with a mechanical movement.
No, not at all. Mechanical movements are a lot harder to identify what's going on, that's for sure. Quiet operation, they really don't make any noise. Some of those mechanical movements at the top of the hour, they get kind of loud when that coil pulls in. If they're not adjusted properly, they start buzzing on you, and it can be a little bit annoying. Some of the manufacturers have some pretty long correction schemes too, like it would pulse on and off for a certain amount of time, and it could go up to a minute dang near, and that can get pretty annoying if the clock is vibrating or out of adjustment. The clocks also do a pretty fast correction, so they still might take overnight, but once they do get the right signal, it walks around to the right time within minutes. It's truly really quick. Cost effective over mechanical certainly is. It is less expensive.
So if you were to buy a new mechanical movement clock, brand new one versus an All-Sync clock, the cost difference there would be quite a bit, right?
It can be up quite a bit. I don't know of a mechanical clock that is less expensive. Mechanical system clock. I really can't think of one off the top of my head. So I'm going to say all mechanicals are more expensive, one for one, than that same clock in an All-Sync clock. That's also true of the warranty. So they also have a better warranty out of the box than the mechanical. It varies, but I'm going to say they're all better. I can't think of one mechanical that has a better warranty than any All-Sync Plus clock. The other advantage, too, of the All-Sync Plus clock is it does have continued operation during power failures, so up to 15 minutes. So if you have those short little power failures, 5 minutes or even 30 seconds, 10 minutes, our All-Sync Plus clock is going to keep on ticking. All the mechanicals are going to stop. When the power comes on, they're going to resume normal operation, but then they're going to be off until the top of the next hour at minimum. Where our clock is going to keep on ticking, and really it has a capacitor in there that recharges. So there's no batteries to put in it, but it has a rechargeable capacitor backup. It's really pretty nice. The other advantage of it is actually you could have a spare clock down in your maintenance room. It could be running you have a clock that fails, you can unplug the clock from your maintenance room and march it down to a classroom or a patient room and plug it in, and that clock will still be on time right when you plug it into location. So that's certainly something that you can't do with a mechanic.
Yeah, so it would just keep time as long as you were within, you know, a 10-minute walking distance from that other room. You could just hang it up and.
Yeah, exactly. It won't miss a beat. We're going to get into our master clocks real briefly here. There's two different versions here. We have an Upcycling IQ master clock, and we have a SideSync master clock. Both of the master clocks that we have here will control any of the clocks we talked about. Any of those mechanical movements, the protocol is built into the master clock. We configure it before it ships from the factory. We try to put in the right clock correction code, but it can be changed through the keypad out in the field if you chose or didn't have the clock code. The other beauty about both of them is you can see that blue Ethernet cable. If you give either one of them a data drop, assign an IP address to it so it's on your network at this single point, it'll go out and grab time for the network. So now the master clock is truly on time with all the other equipment on your network. If you're at school, you can even go to the extent of doing remote programming of your bells through this device also. The one at the bottom is what we call a hybrid master clock. It does everything the top one just does. On top of it, you see that white antenna. That white antenna will send out a wireless signal. So you could have, I could go into a school, we could put this in a building, we can control all their equipment that they have today. If they put an addition on, we could have wireless signal where that addition is. So they don't have to extend their infrastructure of their wiring. Another beauty of that is if they split up a classroom, only one side of the classroom now has a clock, we could put a wireless clock in that other classroom on the other side. So everything will point back to this master clock, which is on Ethernet time, and it'll control the wired clocks, and they could have wireless at the same time.
So any of those clocks are compatible with these masters, and then the Allsync Plus clocks are then compatible with other masters that could be in the field already?
That's true. I'm glad you brought that up, Aaron. There's no need. I mean, I don't want to misconceive that we have to have the Allsync Plus clock work on these master clocks. The Allsync Plus clock was designed to work on other manufacturers' masters right in conjunction with all their clocks.